Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be here this afternoon. I have work, unfortunately, so now you are seeing me as a recording once more. So the passage that I'll be delivering the sermon, or not sermon, the lesson for, is Revelation 2, verses 8 to 11. That is the second letter to uh, of Revelation. It is to the church in Smyrna. So there's a lot of really cool things about Smyrna. There had apparently been a lot of persecutions happening in that particular church, similar to the church to Philadelphia. And what's interesting is that in this letter, there's not a lot of threats or warnings, like in the other letters, because this particular church had gone through a lot of persecution. It turns out that when the church is persecuted, it is also purified. What an interesting thought, right? You tend to think that when a church is going through just, I guess, happy times, that's when they begin to purify themselves. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. Sometimes when a church is persecuted, when the wheat is separated from the chaff, that is when people's faith really do get to stand out. So we can read all about that. So again, the Revelation 2, starting in 8. I'll be shifting us over to the PowerPoint presentation. I hope everyone sees that. But the title of this presentation is Under Pressure. Now, we all feel different sources of pressure in our life, not necessarily the type of pressure the Smyrnans might have felt, having lost their lives and having their blood shed, at least not yet. But right now in 2022 in Canada, we all, suffer still a little bit of pressure, whether it's financial pressure, it's pressure from, maintaining our relationships, pressure from like societal pressure, whether that pressure comes from friends, family, or even the government. So we can all feel some level of pressure weighing us down. And this letter does a really good job at comforting us. Jesus in Revelation, through his letters, and well, the entire letter of Revelation in general, does a really good job at comforting us. But it also prepares us for pressure yet to come. So let's read all about that. So starting in verse 8. Now, it says, and to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the first and the last, who is dead and has come to life, says this. Now, that's typically how most of these letters start. And, Jesus also makes a description about himself. And that's something that is generally not the same throughout all the letters, but there's some emphasis to what he says, or at least there's some significance to that. Let's read what those two things are. The first one is that he's the first and the last, and second, that he was dead and has come to life. So those two things are very, very important in this particular letter to Smyrna. And the reason why is that, there's a lot of theological significance behind Jesus being the first and the last. And that relates a little bit to what he calls himself in the beginning of the letter in Revelation 1, where he says, I am the Alpha and Omega, says the Lord God, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty. So those are three descriptions. And describing himself as the first to last is sort of the same as calling himself the Alpha and Omega, where he's calling attention to his deity. He's calling attention to his transcendent power. He transcends over time. And that's very hopeful to us, because no matter what happens in our lives are temporary. And even in our lives, we go through things where we suffer through tragic events, and those particular events are temporary. If you're an older Christian, you understand this lesson a lot, because you tend to know, if you're older, that life has seasons, that when you're suffering, that's temporary. Even happiness and joy and good health is temporary. Things change as we go older, and sometimes you tend to see like a cyclical nature to things, but at the end of the day, our life is fleeting. and yet Jesus isn't. Jesus is eternal. And that gives us hope, because no matter what happens in life, Jesus is still there. He was present before humans first walked the earth. He's present with us now. And long after we're dead, Jesus will still be here. And that is an amazing thing. Verse 9, it says, I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the blasphemy by those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. So there's two big things about this particular verse. One being that Jesus knows. Remember, this is Jesus giving this letter to the church in Smyrna. He says that I know. Now, this isn't a casual knowledge. He's appealing to a fuller comprehension of what's going on. He's saying that I know everything that's going on in your lives, your tribulation and your poverty. Tribulation in the Greek basically means that they're being pressed down or pressed together, almost like they're in a pressure cooker, almost as if, their olives being pressed down and to be turned into olive oil, or like wheat being grinded down to make flour. That's sort of what, their lives have been. Their lives are being pressed out from them. And that's because of the persecution happening by the Jews and the Romans. So the second part of this verse in particular shows that, there's a blasphemy happening by those who say they are Jews, but they're actually not, because they're a synagogue of Satan. In Smyrna, there's apparently just this Jewish leadership or this Jewish community that has some pull in their society, and they're influencing the Romans, saying very likely that these Christians, they don't respect the emperor. They only believe in one God. So maybe we should just press on them a little bit and maybe poke them hard enough where they'll begin to relent and worship the emperor. So the Jews here have some pull. There's a lot of reasons why the Jews typically in the New Testament wouldn't be very good fans of Christians, which is very unfortunate. But that particular relationship between those two peoples, caused these Christians in Smyrna to suffer a lot of persecution. Do not fear what you are about to suffer, says Jesus. Behold, the devil is about to cast some of you into prison, so that you will be tested and you will have tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. A lot of interesting things here as well. Do not fear what you're about to suffer. Interesting. Notice how Jesus doesn't promise that suffering will not, be taken away. Jesus doesn't do that with us at all. God isn't interested in us not suffering, because suffering does have benefits. Like I said earlier, persecution and suffering tend to purify the church. There's some purpose in suffering. And we see that when it says, so that you will be tested, there's some purpose to it. But what this doesn't tell you right away is that, because of the genre of Revelation, there's a lot of cryptic language or symbolic language that signifies a deeper meaning. One of them being the word 10 days in the middle of this verse. 10 days that typically signifies power or even just completeness or fullness. But one of the things about the number 10 is that it can be multiplied. So it can be you can have like an even bigger fullness if it's 100, or even bigger than that if it's 1,000 or hundreds of thousands or a million. The more you multiply 10, the more fullness or power or completeness you get. But it says 10. So they will undergo suffering that will be, full, comprehensive, but it'll only last a little while. It's not like 1,000 or 10,000 or a million or 100,000. It's only 10. That tells us that the suffering will be, you may not live, but it'll only happen for a little while. It's temporary. But I'm still here, says Jesus. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. And just for image's sake, the crown that he's talking about isn't like a kingly or royal crown. It's sort of like when you typically think of the Olympics or even like the ancient Olympic games, you imagine like a laurel wreath just placed on the heads of the victors. Yeah, he's calling the Smyrnans victors. Even if they die, they'll be victors. They overcome. So it's interesting how Jesus says, doesn't take away the suffering. He tells us not to fear the suffering, and that some of you may even die. But what's amazing is that, this this death won't destroy you. Now, there's an account from Eusebius. He's an early church historian. He describes, I'm just going to read it, how those standing around were struck with amazement at seeing them lacerated with scourges to the very blood and arteries, so that now the flesh concealed in the very inmost parts of the body was exposed to view. So, these Romans might have just slashed these Christians apart. Then they were laid upon conch shells from the sea, and on sharp heads and points of spears on the ground. And after passing through every kind of punishment and torment, were at last thrown as food to wild beasts. So these Christians, unfortunately, were put through the ringer, and they were tormented past anything they could have handled, but not past what Jesus could have handled. And here is another account of Polycarp's death. Polycarp was an elder in the church of Smyrna. Writers like, I guess, Irenaeus, Tertullian, and Jerome have claimed that Polycarp was a disciple of John the Apostle, who wrote this letter. During this time, Christians attempted to hide the aged Polycarp, but a boy was beaten to make him tell where the old man was staying. When they came for Polycarp, he set a table for those who came to arrest him, and while they feasted, he prayed. They finally escorted him into the stadium where a bloodthirsty mob, which included Jews, had assembled. The proconsul urged him to renounce Christ, saying, "Swear by the genius of Caesar, and I will dismiss you. Revile Christ." Polycarp answered, 80 and 6 years, have I served him, and he never did me wrong. And how can I now blaspheme my king that has saved me? When the proconsul tried to intimidate him with threats of wild beasts and fire, the old man replied, "You threaten fire that burns for a moment and is soon extinguished, for you know nothing of the judgment to come, the fire of eternal punishment reserved for the wicked. But why do you delay? Bring what you wish." So obviously, Polycarp's not afraid of the fire to come. The howling mob, led by the Jews, scattered to find wood to burn the aged Christian. When the funeral pyre was ready, they started to nail Polycarp to the stake, but he said, "He that gives me strength to bear the fire will also give me power to remain unmoved on the pile." He clasped his hands behind him around the stake, and he prayed. After the Amen, the executioners lit the fire. Polycarp died with the assurance that he would not be hurt by the second death. And what's left out here in this account is some people believe that when the fires failed to, consume him, then they stabbed him to death. Now, what a grotesque, gruesome tale of Christian persecution around this time. Now, that really comes back to what he was saying, that what Jesus was saying, that, we shouldn't fear the death if death is imminent, because he's still there. And Jesus writes in verse 11, "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes will not be hurt by the second death." So that is what is really important here, in that, Jesus is the one who had died and who's come back to life. Similarly, we will not be hurt by the second death, which will be talked about later in Revelation, but we will not go into that. We have an amazing key to victory. The first one being Jesus. Jesus is our key strategy in this. There are a lot of strategies to win in our walk of faith, to overcome tragedy, to overcome suffering and persecution if we do encounter persecution. And Jesus is that. Remember, he described himself as the first and the last, and the one who's died and who has come back to life. Those two things, amidst all the other things that Jesus is, is our key to overcome a great trial. And the reason why is that Jesus has gone through great trial in his own life. And that gives us hope, because Jesus, oftentimes when we read the Bible, we try our best to relate ourselves to Jesus. But here in this letter, Jesus is relating himself to the church in Smyrna. Jesus relates a lot with the church in Smyrna, and similarly, Jesus can relate to us. If you let me, I'll speak on behalf of Jesus. Like, child, I see you're going through a lot. I've also gone through a lot. But there's hope at the end of the tunnel, because I've walked through that tunnel, and I'll guide you. I'll be with you as you're walking through that tunnel on your own. Jesus relates himself to us through suffering, and that is an amazing lesson for us. But also it tells us that we're not alone. And Jesus, through his life, we're able to learn how he, handled pressure, and we're able to handle that pressure through that lesson as well. So Jesus is our key strategy. Next, we should keep our eye on the prize. Remember, Jesus promises that he'll give us crowns of victory for those who overcome. We can overcome. That's something that he promises us. As long as we remain in him, we can overcome, and we will get a prize. So if you think about it, it's sort of like an athletic games where, you're running this race. It's a long race, and some of us might lose our life, but losing our life doesn't automatically mean we'll lose. It means that, there will be, that means that our race has ended, and then we can be given a reward. And that's great, because, we can prepare for this race. And part of the preparation, is having a great coach, which is Jesus. But we're also, tasks to train, to work out, as a way of speaking, through spiritual disciplines. What are those spiritual disciplines? Well, I can name a few. Some of the things that have worked with me so far is reading daily, studying, not just reading out loud and not thinking about it for the rest of the day, but also, meditating upon scripture, memorizing it, and writing it down, just your thoughts and your own comments on scripture. Another thing is constant prayer, constant relationship with Christ. It can mean, praying at the end of the night, or maybe during, before meals, but it can also mean praying before major things happen in life, or during major events, or it can even be just casual conversation with Christ. Given that Christ is listening to us and he answers on his terms, but it is a conversation. If appearances seem that it's a one-way conversation, it's still a conversation. And that's a great way to understanding how Jesus answers us, and helps us to understand how Jesus thinks and what he values. But some other spiritual disciplines can mean fasting, spending time with other Christians, constantly encouraging and comforting each other. This letter is a letter of comfort, not just to Smyrna, but to all of the 7 churches in Asia, and to us as well. We're tasked to comfort each other, to strengthen one another, to be real with each other. Jesus doesn't say that we're not going to encounter suffering, and we shouldn't lie to our brothers and sisters about that either. We should let each other know, like, look, there are going to be hard times that's going to be happening in life. Whether that hard lesson is given to our peers, or maybe people that we disciple, could even be to a new Christian. Like, look, you may have been baptized, but things start getting hard from here. Your life isn't going to change dramatically. It's going to be a grueling process, but that process is going to lead you to a crown of victory. And we all, when a person first becomes a Christian, they have to count the cost of discipleship. But that counting the cost doesn't stop. We need to be continually counting the cost, because, things are only going to get worse. And we need to really understand, like, look, I cannot just be a backseat Christian. I can't just be a follower. I need to be a true disciple. I need to walk with Christ. And that requires effort on our part. So there's a lot of really cool things about this passage, and I hope that everyone here has something to take away because, you know, the key thing here is that though there is tribulation in our lives, Jesus comforts us and he's with us and he's not intending to ever leave us. And at the end of our lives, he will give us a crown of victory, just like the church to Smyrna, just like the church in Philadelphia, because they have been very, very faithful and they'd be purified because of the suffering that they'd gone through. So let's not look at suffering, with a side eye, or let's not um, preach a gospel that's devoid of suffering. Let's tell it like it is. Suffering does have utility for us. And whenever it comes, let us use that as a chance to see, like, look, there's a chance for me to overcome. Here's a chance for me to grow. That is a very healthy and a biblical way to look at suffering. And let's use that, this lesson to teach us what it means to be a Christian in our own lives, because life is full of suffering. Life is full of these troughs where these seasons where we're not at our best, and those are just growing pains that we can use to grow our faith. So that is the end of the lesson, and I hope everyone here can really take something away from it.